My daughter married a man I never trusted. He is arrogant, entitled, always measuring worth in dollars, never in dignity. When he called me a failure, I said, perfect, and stopped paying their rent. The day my son-in-law learned words have consequences. Boston in October has always carried a certain magic. The air sharpens, the leaves ignite into shades of amber and crimson, and the city hums with a quiet anticipation of winter. On October 16, 2010, that magic was magnified for me. My daughter, Emily Coleman, was getting married. Global family, unite. Comment your hometown, show some love with a like, and subscribe for stories that connect us all. I was 62 then, retired from my professorship at Boston University. For decades, I had lectured on history wars, revolutions, the rise and fall of empires. But nothing in those dusty tomes prepared me for the personal revolution of that day. Walking my only child down the aisle, handing her over to a man I wasn't sure I trusted. The church was a grand old building in Back Bay, its stone walls weathered but dignified, its stained glass windows casting jewel-toned light across the pews. Guests filled the sanctuary, their voices a low murmur of excitement. I sat in the front, my heart swelling with pride and melancholy. Margaret, my wife, had passed away 3 years earlier, and though her absence was a wound that never fully healed, I felt her presence more strongly than ever. She would have adored this day. She would have fussed over Emily's gown, adjusted her veil, whispered encouragement. Emily was radiant. Her ivory dress clung gracefully, lace sleeves delicate against her skin. Her smile was luminous, the kind of joy only youth and love can summon. As I took her arm to walk her down the aisle, I felt the weight of years pressing on me, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the late-night talks about dreams and fears. All of it had led to this moment. Daniel Harris, her groom, stood at the altar. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair neatly combed, his smile polished. He was a corporate lawyer at a prestigious Boston firm, ambitious and confident. Too confident, perhaps. I had met him several times before, and though he was polite enough, something about him unsettled me. Margaret used to say, "Richard, trust your instincts. People reveal themselves in the smallest gestures." Daniel's gestures, checking his phone mid-conversation, chuckling dismissively when I spoke of history, were not lost on me. Still, Emily loved him. And that was enough, or so I told myself. The ceremony unfolded with solemn beauty. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, the priest's voice echoing as he pronounced them husband and wife. Applause filled the church, and I forced myself to smile, to believe in the promise of their union. At the reception hall near the Charles River, chandeliers glowed warmly, tables adorned with roses, the band playing jazz standards Margaret would have swayed to. I raised my glass during the toast, my voice steady as I spoke of love, commitment, and the importance of respect in marriage. But even then, Daniel's eyes seemed to wander, his attention half fixed on the crowd, as if measuring who was worth impressing. When I finished my speech, he clapped politely, then leaned toward Emily and whispered something that made her laugh. I wanted to believe it was affectionate, but a part of me wondered if it was at my expense. Later, Daniel approached me with a drink in hand. "Richard," he said casually, "you did a fine job raising Emily. She's remarkable." I nodded, grateful for the compliment, though I sensed a but lingering. He smirked. "Of course, she's lucky to have me now. I'll make sure she never has to worry about anything." The word struck me like a subtle blow. Lucky to have him? As if my years of nurturing, teaching, sacrificing were merely a prelude to his grand entrance. I forced a smile, unwilling to sour the evening, but inside, a seed of resentment took root. As the night wore on, I retreated to a corner, watching Emily dance with her friends, her laughter echoing across the hall. She was happy, and that was all that mattered. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's confidence was less about love and more about possession. He looked at her not as a partner, but as a prize, a symbol of his success. When the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in Italy, I returned home alone, the silence pressing down on me. Margaret's photograph sat on the mantel, her eyes kind and knowing. I poured myself a glass of scotch and whispered, "I hope I'm wrong about him, for Emily's sake." But deep down, I feared I wasn't. The first years of Emily and Daniel's marriage unfolded with a veneer of stability. On the surface, they were the picture of a young couple building a life together. A modest apartment in Cambridge, careers taking shape, weekends filled with dinners and outings. But beneath that surface, I began to notice cracks, small at first, then widening with time. Their apartment was on the third floor of a brick building near Harvard Square. I visited often, usually on Sunday afternoons. Emily would brew coffee, the rich aroma filling the room, while Daniel poured himself a glass of wine, swirling it as though he were a connoisseur. We'd sit in their living room, sunlight streaming through tall windows, books stacked neatly on shelves, plants thriving in the corners. It was cozy, warm, Emily's touch everywhere. Yet Daniel's presence always seemed to shift the atmosphere, tilting it toward tension. He spoke endlessly about his work at the law firm, cases, promotions, partners he hoped to impress. His ambition was palpable, almost suffocating. Emily, meanwhile, poured her energy into teaching high school English. She loved her students, loved the challenge of shaping young minds. I remember one afternoon in 2011 when she proudly shared that one of her students had won a statewide essay contest. Her eyes sparkled as she told the story, her voice alive with joy. Daniel chuckled, dismissive. "That's cute," he said, sipping his wine. "But let's be honest, teaching isn't exactly changing the world." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Emily's smile faltered, though she tried to brush it off. I bit my tongue, but inside I seethed. Margaret would have scolded him for such arrogance. She believed teaching was one of the noblest professions, shaping futures in ways no courtroom ever could. I wanted to defend Emily, but she waved it away, unwilling to start a fight. That was her nature, gentle, forgiving, always seeking harmony. But I worried that Daniel's dismissiveness would erode her spirit over time. Financially, they struggled. Their rent was steep, and though Daniel earned a decent salary, he insisted on living beyond their means. Expensive dinners, designer clothes, vacations abroad. Emily confided in me once, her voice hesitant, that they were falling behind on bills. Without hesitation, I offered to cover their rent for a while. "It's just until you get settled," I told her. She hugged me, grateful, her eyes shining with relief. Daniel's reaction was less gracious. He accepted the help, of course, but with an air of entitlement, as if it were his due. "Richard," he said one evening, "you're doing the right thing. Family should support family. Besides, it's not like you have much else to spend your retirement on." The word stung. I had saved carefully all my life, not for extravagance, but for security. Helping them was a choice, not an obligation. Yet Daniel spoke as though my resources existed solely for his benefit. I smiled thinly, unwilling to argue, but the resentment grew. By 2012, cracks in their marriage began to show more clearly. Emily confided in me during a walk along the Charles River. The water shimmered under the autumn sun, leaves drifting lazily on the current. "Dad," she said softly, "sometimes I feel like Daniel doesn't really see me. He's so focused on his career, on appearances. I try to support him, but it's exhausting." I listened, my heart aching. I wanted to tell her to leave him, to find someone who cherished her, but I knew it wasn't my place. Instead, I reminded her of her strength, of the values Margaret and I had instilled in her. "Respect yourself, Emily," I said. "Don't let anyone diminish your worth." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, Dad. I hope he changes." But Daniel didn't change. If anything, his arrogance deepened. At family gatherings, he dominated conversations, dismissing others' opinions with a smirk. He once mocked my love of history, calling it irrelevant trivia. "What's the point of studying battles and kings?" he scoffed. "The real world is about money and power." I stared at him, stunned by his ignorance. History, to me, was the story of humanity, the lessons of triumph and failure that shaped our present. Margaret used to say that history was a mirror, reflecting who we were and who we might become. To hear Daniel belittle, it was not just insulting, it was a rejection of everything I had devoted my life to. Still, I held my tongue. For Emily's sake, I endured his disrespect, convincing myself that patience was the wiser path. But each slight chipped away at my tolerance. Each arrogant remark a reminder that Daniel saw me not as a father-in-law, but as an obstacle, a relic of the past. In 2013, the tension reached a breaking point. It was Thanksgiving, and I had invited them to my home in Brookline. I spent the day preparing Margaret's favorite recipes: roast turkey, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. The house smelled of warmth and tradition, and I felt her presence in every dish. Emily arrived with a smile, carrying a bouquet of autumn flowers. Daniel followed, his phone glued to his hand. Dinner began pleasantly enough, with laughter and stories. But midway through the meal, Daniel made a remark that cut deep. He compared me to his own father, a wealthy businessman in New York. "You know, Richard," he said, swirling his wine, "my father always knew how to provide. He built an empire, gave us everything we needed. You did fine with Emily, of course, but let's be honest, you never reached that level." The table fell silent. Emily's eyes widened, horrified. I felt the words like a blade, sharp and deliberate. For years, I had sacrificed, worked tirelessly, and given Emily all the love and guidance I could. To have Daniel dismiss it so casually, to measure my worth against wealth, was unbearable. I looked at him, my voice steady but cold. "Perfect," I said. Just that one word. Daniel smirked, perhaps thinking I was conceding. But inside, something shifted. I realized I had been too generous, too forgiving. Respect was not a gift to be demanded, it was earned. And Daniel had squandered it. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my study, Margaret's photograph beside me. I whispered to her, "I won't let him diminish me anymore." And with that, I made a decision. I would stop paying their rent. I would reclaim my dignity, even if it meant conflict. Thanksgiving had always been sacred in our family. Margaret loved the holiday, the ritual of preparing food, the warmth of gathering, the way gratitude seemed to soften even the hardest edges of life. After she passed, I tried to keep the tradition alive, not just for myself, but for Emily. It was a way of honoring her mother, of reminding us both that love and memory could still fill the house. In November 2014, I invited Emily and Daniel to my home in Brookline. I spent the day cooking Margaret's favorite recipes: roast turkey, seasoned with rosemary, cranberry sauce tart, and bright pumpkin pie spiced with cinnamon. The house smelled of warmth and tradition, the kitchen alive with steam and clatter. I set the table carefully, polishing the silverware Margaret had inherited from her grandmother, arranging candles so their glow would soften the evening. Emily arrived first, carrying a bouquet of autumn flowers. She hugged me tightly, her smile radiant. "Dad, it smells amazing," she said, placing the flowers in a vase. Her presence filled the house with light, as it always did. Daniel followed, phone in hand, his eyes flicking to the screen even as he greeted me. "Richard," he said curtly, shaking my hand. His grip was limp, his smile perfunctory. He looked around the house, his gaze lingering on the old furniture, the worn bookshelves. I wondered what he saw: comfort, history, or simply the absence of wealth. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Emily chatted about her students, her voice animated as she described their essays and projects. I listened with pride, marveling at her passion. Daniel, however, seemed disinterested, scrolling through his phone between bites. When Emily asked him about his work, he launched into a monologue about a case, his tone self-congratulatory, his words heavy with jargon. I nodded politely, though my mind wandered. His arrogance was exhausting. Midway through the meal, the conversation shifted. Daniel set down his glass of wine, swirling it with deliberate slowness. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "You know, Richard," he said, "my father always knew how to provide. He built an empire, gave us everything we needed. You did fine with Emily, of course, but let's be honest, you never reached that level." The words struck like a blade. The table fell silent. Emily's eyes widened, horrified. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me, decades of sacrifice, of teaching, of nurturing Emily with love and guidance. To have Daniel dismiss it so casually, to measure my worth against wealth, was unbearable. I looked at him, my voice steady but cold. "Perfect," I said. Just that one word. Daniel smirked, perhaps thinking I was conceding. But inside, something shifted. I realized I had been too generous, too forgiving. Respect was not a gift to be demanded, it was earned. And Daniel had squandered it. The rest of the evening passed in strained silence. Emily tried to salvage the mood, but the damage was done. Daniel's arrogance had crossed a line, and I could not ignore it. When they left, Emily hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm sorry, Dad." I kissed her forehead, my heart aching. "It's not your fault," I said softly. That night, I sat alone in my study, Margaret's photograph beside me. I poured a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the candlelight. I whispered to her, "I won't let him diminish me anymore." Her eyes, frozen in the photograph, seemed to shine with approval. I thought of the years I had spent supporting them financially, covering their rent, offering guidance. I thought of Daniel's dismissiveness, his arrogance, his cruelty. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that it had to end. I would stop paying their rent. I would reclaim my dignity, even if it meant conflict. It was the turning point, the moment I chose silence over submission, boundaries over exploitation. Daniel would learn that arrogance has consequences, and Emily would see that her father's silence was not weakness, but strength. The decision came quietly, without drama, without announcement. After Thanksgiving of 2014, after Daniel's smug comparison of me to his father, I knew something had shifted. I had spent years subsidizing their life, covering rent, offering financial support, all in the name of love for Emily. But love without respect becomes exploitation, and Daniel had shown me none. So in January 2015, I simply stopped sending the check. No letter, no explanation, just silence. Emily called me in February, her voice tinged with worry. "Dad, the landlord said the rent hasn't been paid. Did something happen?" I took a deep breath. "Emily, I've helped you for years, but you and Daniel need to stand on your own now. It's time." There was silence on the line, then a soft sigh. "I understand, Dad. I just wish you'd told me sooner." Her tone carried no anger, only resignation. She had always been pragmatic, willing to adapt, but I knew Daniel would not take it so gracefully. Sure enough, a week later, he showed up at my house unannounced. It was a cold evening, snow piled along the sidewalks, the air sharp with winter. He knocked loudly, and when I opened the door, he strode in without waiting for an invitation. "Richard," he said, his jaw tight. "What's this about cutting us off? Do you realize how much stress you're putting on Emily?" I closed the door and faced him calmly. "Daniel, Emily is stronger than you think. She'll manage. And so will you." He scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You have the money. Why not help your own daughter?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "Because help without respect becomes exploitation. I won't be treated like a wallet. I'm her father, not your benefactor." His face reddened, his fists clenching. For a moment, I thought he might lash out. But instead, he sneered. "Fine, we'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect gratitude when Emily struggles." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the quiet, my heart pounding, but I felt no regret. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. Dignity is not negotiable. The months that followed were tense. Emily visited less often, torn between loyalty to her husband and love for me. When she did come, she looked tired, her eyes shadowed. She admitted they were struggling financially, that Daniel's lifestyle was unsustainable without my support. "He wants to keep up appearances," she said softly. "But it's exhausting." I listened, offering comfort but no money. Instead, I encouraged her to trust her own strength, to remember that she was capable. "You don't need luxury to be happy," I told her. "You need respect, love, and peace." By summer, the cracks in their marriage were visible to everyone. At a family barbecue, Daniel arrived late, his suit rumpled, his mood sour. He barely spoke to anyone, scrolling through his phone as others laughed and shared stories. When Emily tried to engage him, he snapped, "I don't have time for this nonsense." I watched, my chest tight with anger. But I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, was sometimes more powerful than words. Later that evening, Emily pulled me aside. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." He doesn't listen. He doesn't care. I hugged her, wishing I could shield her from pain. "You're stronger than you realize," I said. "Don't let him define your worth." In September, Daniel confronted me again, this time at a cafe near Harvard Square. He had asked to meet, and though I hesitated, I agreed. He arrived in a tailored suit, his expression smug. "Richard," he began, "I've been thinking. Maybe we can work out a deal. You help us with rent again, and I'll make sure Emily visits you more often. You won't be so lonely." The audacity of his words stunned me. He was bargaining with my daughter's presence, as if she were a commodity. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "Daniel, my relationship with Emily is not for sale, and my dignity is not negotiable. If you can't respect me, then stay out of my life." His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. For the first time, I saw cracks in his armor. He muttered something under his breath and left, his confidence shaken. That night, I sat in my study, Margaret's photograph beside me. I whispered, "I did it, love." I stood my ground, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The quiet retaliation had worked not through confrontation or anger, but through silence and boundaries. I had reclaimed my dignity, and in doing so, I had forced Daniel to confront his own fragility. The years 2015 and 2016 were not easy. They were filled with tension, silence, and unspoken pain. But they were also years of growth, of resilience, of quiet strength. I learned that retaliation need not be loud to be powerful. Sometimes, the most profound statement is silence, the refusal to be diminished, the insistence on dignity. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never again allow arrogance to define my worth. I was Richard Coleman, father, husband, professor, and man of dignity. And that was enough. By 2017, the silence between Daniel and me had hardened into something permanent. It was no longer a temporary rift, but a wall, solid and immovable. I had drawn my boundary years earlier, refusing to subsidize their lifestyle. And though I never regretted it, I knew the consequences were rippling outward in ways I couldn't fully control. Emily invited me to dinner at their Somerville apartment in early 2017. The meal was simple pasta, salad, a bottle of wine, but the atmosphere was heavy. Daniel sat across from me, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. Finally, he spoke. "You know, Richard," he said, his voice sharp, "Emily wouldn't be so stressed if you hadn't abandoned us financially. A real father would have continued to help." Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "Daniel, stop," she whispered. I leaned back, my tone calm but firm. "Daniel, I didn't abandon anyone. I gave generously for years. But respect is not bought with money. It's earned, and you've shown me none." His face reddened, his fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he might explode. But instead, he pushed back his chair and stormed out, leaving Emily in tears. She turned to me, her voice trembling. "Dad, I don't know how much longer I can do this. He's so angry, so bitter. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells every day." I reached across the table, taking her hand. "Emily, you are stronger than you realize. Don't let his bitterness consume you. You deserve peace." By the summer of 2017, Daniel's arrogance had begun to crumble. His firm was demanding, his colleagues ruthless, and without the cushion of my financial support, his confidence faltered. Rumors spread of missed deadlines, of mistakes in cases. He tried to mask it with bravado, but the cracks were visible. At a family gathering that July, he arrived late, his suit wrinkled, his mood sour. He barely spoke, scrolling through his phone as others laughed and shared stories. When Emily tried to engage him, he snapped, "I don't have time for this nonsense." I watched, my chest tight with anger, but I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, was sometimes more powerful than words. In 2018, Emily confided in me during a walk along the Charles River. "Dad," she whispered, "sometimes I wonder if I married the wrong man. He's so consumed by pride, by appearances. I feel invisible." I stopped, turning to her. "Emily, you are never invisible. You are radiant, strong, and worthy of love. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I just don't know if I can keep living like this." I hugged her, wishing I could shield her from pain. "Whatever choice you make, I'll be here. Always." Meanwhile, Daniel's resentment toward me grew. He avoided me entirely, refusing to attend gatherings where I was present. He told colleagues that I had betrayed him, that I was selfish. But I felt no guilt. My retaliation had been quiet, deliberate, and necessary. I had reclaimed my dignity, and in doing so, I had forced him to confront his own fragility. The years 2017 and 2018 were not easy. They were filled with tension, silence, and unspoken pain. But they were also years of truth, of revelation, of consequences. Emily began to see Daniel for who he truly was, not a partner, but a man consumed by pride. And I, Richard Coleman, stood firm in my resolve, knowing that silence was sometimes the loudest statement of all. By 2019, the silence between Daniel and me had stretched into years. It had become a kind of cold war, no shouting, no direct confrontation, just a wall of distance that neither of us seemed willing to dismantle. Emily, ever the peacemaker, grew weary of the tension. She wanted harmony, wanted her husband and her father to coexist without bitterness. And so, one spring afternoon, she asked me to meet Daniel for lunch. "Dad," she said gently, "he wants to talk." He says he's ready to make peace. I studied her face, searching for signs of hope or desperation. Emily, I'll meet him. But you know as well as I do words mean nothing without respect. She nodded, her eyes pleading. Just give him a chance. We met at a cafe near Copley Square, a place bustling with students, professionals, and tourists. The air smelled of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, the chatter of conversations blending into a steady hum. Daniel arrived in a crisp suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile rehearsed. He extended his hand, and I shook it, though my grip was firm, my eyes steady. "Richard," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Thank you for coming. I know things have been tense." I nodded, waiting. He leaned forward, his tone smooth. "I want to put the past behind us. I know I've said things I shouldn't have. I know I've been difficult, but I want us to move forward for Emily's sake." His words were polished, carefully chosen. But beneath the veneer, I sensed insincerity. He wasn't apologizing out of genuine remorse. He was maneuvering, strategizing, as if this were another case at his firm. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I spoke. "Daniel, reconciliation requires honesty. Do you respect me?" He hesitated, his smile faltering. "Of course I do." I leaned closer. "Respect isn't a word you toss around. It's shown in actions, in how you treat people. You've dismissed me, belittled me, compared me unfavorably to your father. You've treated Emily as a trophy rather than a partner. So I'll ask again, do you respect me?" His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, the mask slipped, revealing irritation. But then he forced a smile. "Yes, Richard, I respect you." I sat back, unconvinced. "Then prove it. Not with words, but with how you treat Emily, with how you carry yourself. Respect isn't about me, it's about her. If you can't honor her, you'll never honor me." He shifted uncomfortably, his confidence shaken. "I'll try," he muttered. I nodded. "That's all I ask. But understand this, I won't be manipulated. I won't be bought with apologies or bargains. My dignity is not negotiable." The lunch ended awkwardly, with forced pleasantries and hollow promises. Emily was hopeful when I told her about it. "Dad, maybe this is the start of something better," she said, her voice tinged with optimism. I smiled gently. "Emily, change is possible, but it must come from the heart, not from strategy. Watch his actions. They'll tell you the truth." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. In the months that followed, Daniel made small gestures attending family gatherings, speaking politely, even offering compliments. But they felt rehearsed, calculated. He would compliment Emily's cooking, but his tone was flat. He would ask me about my garden, but his eyes wandered. Emily noticed too. "Dad," she said one evening, "I think he's trying, but it feels fake." I sighed. "Emily, change is possible, but it must come from the heart, not from strategy. Watch his actions. They'll tell you the truth." By the end of 2019, the facade was cracking again. Daniel's attempts at reconciliation faltered, his arrogance resurfacing in subtle ways. He couldn't sustain the performance because it wasn't genuine. He grew impatient, dismissive, slipping back into old habits. At a Christmas gathering, he made a remark about my old-fashioned views, chuckling as though it were harmless. Emily's face fell, and I simply smiled, refusing to take the bait. Silence, I had learned, was sometimes the loudest response. The reconciliation attempt had failed not because I refused to forgive, but because Daniel refused to change. And so, the wall remained, a silent testament to the power of dignity and the futility of insincerity. I realized then that reconciliation is not about words spoken over coffee or gestures made at gatherings. It is about humility, respect, and sincerity. Without those, peace is impossible. And so, I waited not for Daniel's apology, but for Emily's awakening. Because in the end, the true reconciliation would not be between Daniel and me, but between Emily and herself, between the life she had chosen and the dignity she deserved. The world changed in 2020. Streets emptied, shops shuttered, and silence fell over Boston like a heavy blanket. The pandemic forced everyone into solitude, and for me, solitude was already familiar. Margaret's absence had taught me the contours of loneliness years before, but now the entire city seemed to echo with it. My days became simple, almost monastic. I woke early, brewed coffee, and tended to my garden. Tomatoes, basil, and peppers thrived under my care, their growth a quiet reminder that life persisted even in uncertainty. I walked along the Charles River, the water shimmering under muted skies, the pathways eerily quiet. Masks hid faces, but eyes revealed fear, fatigue, and sometimes kindness. Books became my companions. I read voraciously history, philosophy, poetry. I revisited Thucydides, who wrote of plagues in Athens, and found eerie parallels. I read Marcus Aurelius, whose meditations on resilience felt newly urgent. And I read Margaret's favorite poets, Mary Oliver, Seamus Heaney, finding her voice in their lines. Knowledge became my armor, reflection my refuge. Friends became lifelines. I reconnected with old colleagues from Boston University, meeting them over Zoom calls that stretched late into the night. We debated history, laughed about past students, shared stories of resilience. I joined a local book club where strangers became companions, their perspectives widening my own. For the first time in years, I felt part of a community not defined by conflict, but by curiosity and kindness. One evening, during a virtual book club, we discussed Camus' The Plague. The parallels were striking: fear, isolation, resilience. I spoke of dignity, of how silence can be strength. A younger member, a graduate student, asked me, "Professor Coleman, do you think dignity is enough to survive something like this?" I paused, considering. Dignity is not about survival, I said. It's about living with integrity, even when survival is uncertain. It's about refusing to be diminished, no matter the circumstances. Emily visited often, sometimes masked and cautious, sometimes simply needing her father's embrace. She spoke openly about her marriage, her exhaustion, her doubts. "Dad," she said one evening in 2020, her voice heavy, "I feel like I'm living with a stranger. He's so consumed by appearances, by pride. I don't know if he even sees me anymore." I held her hand, my heart aching. "Emily, love is not about being seen as an accessory. It's about being cherished. You deserve that." She nodded, tears glistening. "I just don't know if he'll ever change." I didn't answer. Some truths are too heavy to speak aloud. Instead, I reminded her of her strength, of the dignity she carried within. "Whatever choice you make, I'll be here. Always." Meanwhile, Daniel's arrogance continued to falter. The pandemic stripped away illusions: no lavish dinners, no grand gatherings, no stage for his performance. He was forced to confront himself, and from what Emily told me, he didn't like what he saw. His firm demanded long hours, his colleagues were ruthless, and without the cushion of appearances, his confidence cracked. He grew bitter, resentful, lashing out at Emily, blaming me for their struggles. But I remained silent. My retaliation had been quiet, deliberate, and it continued to echo. I had reclaimed my dignity years earlier, and now, in the stillness of the pandemic, I found peace in that choice. In 2021, as the world began to reopen, I reflected on the journey. I thought of Margaret, of her wisdom, her belief in respect and resilience. I thought of Emily, her strength, her courage, her quiet endurance. And I thought of myself not as a man diminished by arrogance, but as a man who had stood firm, who had refused to be defined by another's disrespect. I realized that dignity is not a loud declaration. It is a quiet insistence, a refusal to bend to arrogance, a steady flame that burns even in the darkest times. My silence had been my strength, my retaliation my resilience. And though the years had been painful, they had also been transformative. By the end of 2021, I felt lighter, freer. I had rebuilt my independence, found peace in solitude and friendships, and rediscovered the man I had always been. Richard Coleman, father, husband, professor, man of dignity. And that was enough. By 2022, I had grown accustomed to solitude. My garden thrived, my bookshelves overflowed, and my friendships sustained me. Emily continued to visit, her presence a balm against the lingering ache of Margaret's absence. Daniel remained a shadow present in Emily's life, but distant from mine, his arrogance tempered but never extinguished. It was in the spring of that year that the final confrontation came. Emily had invited me to dinner at their home, hoping once more for peace. I hesitated, but agreed. I knew the years of silence had taken their toll, and perhaps it was time to close the chapter, one way or another. The evening began politely enough. Emily cooked a simple meal, her warmth filling the room. Daniel greeted me with a handshake, his smile forced but present. We sat at the table, the air thick with unspoken history. For a while, conversation flowed, books, teaching, the garden. But eventually, the tension surfaced. Daniel set down his glass of wine, his eyes fixed on me. "Richard," he said, his tone measured, "I know we've had our differences, but I want to be clear. I've always done what I thought was best for Emily. Maybe I've made mistakes, but I've provided, I've worked hard, and I think you've judged me unfairly." I studied him, noting the flicker of defensiveness beneath his words. "Daniel," I replied calmly, "providing is not the same as respecting. You've worked hard, yes, but respect is not measured in paychecks or promotions. It's measured in how you treat the people you claim to love." He bristled, his jaw tightening. "I've given her everything she could want." I shook my head. "No, Daniel, you've given her things. But what she wants, what she deserves, is dignity, partnership, kindness. Those cannot be bought. They must be lived." Silence fell. Emily looked between us, her eyes wide, her breath held. For the first time, Daniel seemed at a loss for words. His arrogance faltered, replaced by something unfamiliar: uncertainty. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I don't need your apology. I don't need reconciliation. What I need, what Emily needs, is respect. If you cannot give her that, then no amount of money, no amount of appearances will matter. Respect is the foundation. Without it, everything crumbles." Daniel's face reddened, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. He sat back, his silence louder than any argument. Emily reached for my hand, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. That night, as I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, I felt a sense of closure. The confrontation had not ended in reconciliation, but it had ended in clarity. I had spoken my truth, calmly, firmly, without anger. I had asserted my dignity, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my legacy. In the months that followed, Emily grew stronger. She began to set boundaries of her own, insisting on respect, demanding partnership. Whether Daniel could rise to meet her was uncertain, but I knew she had found her voice. And that, more than anything, was my victory. As for me, I embraced the quiet of my days. I tended my garden, read my books, cherished my friendships. I carried Margaret's wisdom with me, her belief in dignity and resilience. And I looked at Emily with pride, knowing she had inherited that strength. The story of Daniel and me was not one of reconciliation, but of boundaries. It was a story of silence as strength, of dignity as non-negotiable, of resilience in the face of arrogance. And as I closed the chapter, I knew one truth with absolute clarity. Respect is the foundation of love, and dignity is the legacy we leave behind. I was Richard Coleman, father, husband, professor, man of dignity. And that was enough. By 2023, the silence between Daniel and me had become less important than the silence between Daniel and Emily. She had carried the weight of his arrogance for more than a decade, but something in her began to shift. The pandemic years had stripped away illusions, and now she was ready to confront the truth. She deserved more than appearances, more than possessions, more than being treated as a trophy. She deserved respect. Her awakening began in the classroom. Emily had always loved teaching, but Daniel's dismissiveness had dimmed her joy. In 2023, she threw herself back into her work with renewed passion. She organized a poetry festival, encouraged her students to write about resilience, and found herself inspired by their voices. One student, a shy girl named Clara, wrote a poem about invisibility, about being overlooked, dismissed, unseen. Emily read it aloud to the class, her voice trembling. She recognized herself in Clara's words. Afterward, she told me, "Dad, I realized I've been living invisible too, and I don't want that anymore." That spring, Emily confronted Daniel. She told me about it afterward, her voice steady, her eyes fierce. "I told him," she said, "that I'm done being treated like an accessory. I told him I want respect, partnership, kindness. And if he can't give me that, then I don't know if I can stay." I listened, my heart swelling with pride. For years, I had hoped she would find her voice, and now she had. Daniel's reaction was predictable: anger, defensiveness, denial. He accused her of being ungrateful, of being influenced by me. But Emily stood firm. "This isn't about my father," she told him. "This is about me, about what I deserve." One evening, Emily and I walked along the Charles River, the water shimmering under the setting sun. She told me about the confrontation, about her newfound strength. "Dad," she said, For so long I thought I had to keep the peace to make things work. But I realize now that peace without respect isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And I won't surrender anymore. I stopped, turning to her, my eyes shining. Emily, you've inherited your mother's strength. Margaret always believed dignity was the foundation of love. And now you're living that truth. She smiled, tears glistening. I feel free, Dad. For the first time in years, I feel free. As Emily grew stronger, Daniel grew more isolated. His arrogance no longer impressed colleagues. His mistakes at the firm piled up. Without Emily's quiet compliance, his confidence faltered. He tried to regain control, but his words rang hollow. At a family gathering, he sat alone, scrolling through his phone, ignored by others. Emily, meanwhile, laughed with cousins, her joy radiant. I watched, knowing the balance had shifted. The power Daniel once wielded through arrogance had crumbled, replaced by Emily's quiet strength. By the end of 2023, Emily had awakened fully. She was no longer the young bride trying to please an arrogant husband. She was a woman of dignity, a teacher of resilience, a daughter who had inherited her mother's wisdom. I, Richard Coleman, watched with pride. My quiet retaliation years earlier had set the stage, but Emily's awakening was her own. She had reclaimed her voice, her strength, her dignity. And in doing so, she had ensured that Margaret's legacy lived on. By 2023, Emily's awakening had shifted the balance of power in her marriage. She was no longer silent, no longer willing to surrender her dignity. And as she grew stronger, Daniel began to falter. His arrogance, once polished and convincing, now looked brittle. The cracks widened, and by 2024, decline was inevitable. Daniel's law firm had always been his stage. He thrived on appearances-tailored suits, confident speeches, the illusion of control. But beneath the surface, his performance was slipping. Colleagues whispered about missed deadlines, careless mistakes, and his inability to collaborate. One partner confided to Emily, who later told me, Daniel's reputation isn't what it used to be. He's burning bridges. He tried to mask the failures with bravado, boasting about cases, exaggerating victories. But the truth was clear. His arrogance had become a liability. The firm valued competence and humility, and Daniel had neither. At home, the decline was even more visible. Emily no longer tolerated his dismissiveness. When he mocked her teaching, she confronted him. Daniel, she said firmly, my work matters. My students matter. And if you can't respect that, then you don't respect me. He scoffed, but the words lingered. Emily's strength unsettled him. He was used to control, to compliance, and now he faced resistance. His frustration grew, his temper flared, and the distance between them widened. At family gatherings, Daniel became increasingly isolated. He sat alone, scrolling through his phone, ignored by others. Emily laughed with cousins, her joy radiant, while Daniel sulked in the corner. I watched, noting the shift. Once, his arrogance had dominated the room. Now it repelled. People saw through the facade, recognizing the insecurity beneath. Emily, meanwhile, flourished. She organized community events, mentored students, and found joy in her independence. She visited me often, her voice steady, her eyes bright. Dad, she said, I feel stronger every day. I don't need his approval anymore. I smiled proud. You've inherited your mother's strength. Margaret would be so proud. By 2024, Daniel's decline was undeniable. His career faltered, his marriage strained, his arrogance exposed. He had built his identity on appearances, but appearances cannot sustain a life. Without respect, without humility, everything crumbles. I reflected often on the lessons of history. Empires built on arrogance always fall. Pride blinds, isolates, destroys. And Daniel was living proof. As I watched Emily grow stronger and Daniel falter, I felt a sense of closure. My quiet retaliation years earlier had set the stage, but Daniel's decline was his own doing. Arrogance collapses under its own weight, and dignity endures. I, Richard Coleman, stood firm, knowing that silence had been my strength, and that legacy is not measured in wealth or power, but in respect, resilience, and dignity. By 2024, the balance of my life had shifted. The years of tension with Daniel had left scars, but they no longer defined me. Emily was awakening to her own strength, and Daniel was unraveling under the weight of his arrogance. For me, the season was one of renewal, of building new bonds, of rediscovering community, of finding joy and connection. My book club had become a lifeline. What began as a small group of neighbors meeting virtually during the pandemic had blossomed into a vibrant circle of thinkers, readers, and friends. We gathered monthly, sometimes in person, sometimes online, to discuss literature, history, and philosophy. One evening, we debated Toni Morrison's Beloved. The conversation turned to memory, trauma, and resilience. A young graduate student named Maya asked me, "Professor Coleman, how do you carry the weight of the past without letting it crush you?" I paused, considering. By turning memory into wisdom, I said, "The past is heavy, yes, but if we carry it with dignity, it becomes a guide, not a burden." The group fell silent, then nodded. In that moment, I felt Margaret's presence. She had always believed in the power of memory, in the importance of carrying it with grace. Beyond the book club, I began mentoring younger colleagues and students virtually. Former students reached out, seeking guidance on careers, on life, on resilience. I shared stories of history, of empires that rose and fell, of leaders undone by arrogance, of communities sustained by dignity. One student, now a young lawyer, confessed his fear of becoming like Daniel, consumed by pride, blind to respect. I told him, "Arrogance is a fragile armor. It cracks under pressure. Build your life on humility, on respect, and you'll endure." He thanked me, his voice steady. "I'll remember that, Professor." Emily leaned on me more than ever. She visited often, seeking not just comfort but guidance. She spoke of her struggles, her doubts, her hopes. "Dad," she said one evening, "I feel like I'm rebuilding my life from the ground up. It's terrifying, but also liberating." I smiled. "You're not rebuilding alone. You have your students, your friends, and me. And you have your mother's wisdom within you." She nodded, tears glistening. "I feel her with me, Dad. Every time I stand up for myself, I feel her strength." My garden thrived that year, more vibrant than ever. Tomatoes, basil, peppers, roses all flourished under my care. Neighbors stopped by, admiring the blooms, sharing stories, offering friendship. The garden became a symbol of renewal, of resilience, of community. One afternoon, Emily joined me in the garden. She knelt beside me, planting marigolds. "Dad," she said softly, "this feels like healing, like we're planting hope." I looked at her, my heart swelling. "That's exactly what it is, Emily. Hope rooted in dignity." By the end of 2024, I felt a sense of peace. The years of conflict had given way to renewal. I had built new bonds, mentored younger generations, deepened friendships, and watched Emily grow into her strength. Daniel's decline continued, but it no longer consumed me. My focus was on resilience, on dignity, on legacy. I realized that life is not measured by wealth or power, but by the bonds we build, the respect we give, the wisdom we share. I, Richard Coleman, stood firm, knowing that my legacy was not in possessions but in people, in Emily, in my students, in my friends, in the garden that bloomed with hope. By 2025, the storm had passed. Daniel's decline was evident, Emily's awakening complete, and my own life had settled into a rhythm of peace. The years of tension had left their mark, but they no longer defined me. What remained was clarity. Dignity endures, arrogance collapses, and legacy is built not on possessions, but on respect. That year, I began writing letters to Emily, not because I expected her to need them, but because I wanted her to have something tangible, words she could hold, wisdom she could carry. In one letter, I wrote, "Emily, dignity is the foundation of love. Without it, relationships crumble. Your mother believed this, and I have lived it. Carry it with you always." In another, I reminded her of Margaret's wisdom. "Your mother taught me that silence can be strength. She believed that boundaries protect love, not diminish it. Remember that, especially when the world tries to erode your worth." Emily treasured the letters. She told me, "Dad, I keep them in my desk at school. When I feel overwhelmed, I read them. They remind me who I am." Margaret's presence remained strong. I felt her in the garden, in the books we once read together, in Emily's laughter. She had been the anchor of our family, the embodiment of dignity and resilience. One evening, as I sat in the garden, I whispered to her, "We did it, love. Emily has found her strength. Your wisdom lives on." The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and I felt her approval. Emily had transformed. She was no longer the young bride trying to please an arrogant husband. She was a woman of strength, a teacher of resilience, a daughter who carried her mother's legacy. She organized a community program, mentoring young teachers, sharing lessons of dignity and respect. She told me, "Dad, I want to pass on what you and Mom taught me. I want my students to know that respect is non-negotiable." I watched with pride, knowing that Margaret's wisdom had taken root in Emily's life, blossoming into something enduring. Daniel, meanwhile, had grown quiet. His arrogance had collapsed under its own weight. His career faltered, his presence diminished. He no longer confronted me, no longer tried to assert control. He was a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. Emily told me, "He's different now. Not better, just quieter. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I won't surrender my dignity again." I nodded, knowing that her strength would protect her, no matter what path she chose. By the end of 2025, I felt a sense of closure. The journey had been long, painful, and transformative. I had endured arrogance, reclaimed my dignity, and watched my daughter awaken to her own strength. I realized that legacy is not measured in wealth or power. It is measured in respect, in resilience, in the wisdom we pass on. My legacy was Margaret's wisdom, Emily's strength, and the dignity that had sustained me. As the year ended, I sat in my garden, the winter air crisp, the earth resting. I looked at the roses, the tomatoes, the basil, all dormant but alive, waiting for spring. I thought of Margaret, of Emily, of the journey we had taken. I whispered, "I am Richard Coleman, father, husband, professor, man of dignity." And that is enough. The garden was silent, but I felt its promise. Spring would come, renewal would follow, and dignity would endure. Asterisk. I have lived long enough to know that wealth fades, appearances crumble, and arrogance collapses under its own weight. What endures is dignity. Protect it fiercely. Do not surrender it for convenience, for approval, or for comfort. Respect is the foundation of love. Without it, relationships are hollow shells. Demand it, give it, and teach it, for it is the soil in which trust and kindness grow. Silence can be strength. You do not need to shout to assert your worth. Sometimes the most powerful retaliation is simply refusing to be diminished. Legacy is not measured in possessions, but in wisdom passed on, in boundaries set, in resilience lived. My garden, my books, my daughter's strength, these are my riches. So to everyone who hears me, live with integrity, stand firm in your dignity, and remember, you are enough. Asterisk. This isn't just a story, it's a stand. If you felt the weight, let the world know in the comments. Amplify it with a like, and subscribe for more raw journeys of survival. Until next time, stay strong, stay unstoppable.